Hello, economics students. Today we're going to be going over the Unit 3 activity. This one talks about the government's influence over the economy. So we're going to be talking a lot about the Federal Reserve and also how the government uses taxes and how they spend their resources in order to try to manipulate or bolster the economy or and various things. So let's go ahead and get started. So I hope you have the activity open. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And the activity should look like this. I'm already on page 5 here, task 1. And we're going to go and read this. So please follow along as I read aloud. It says, fiscal policy is the government's use of government spending and taxes to influence the economy. For this task, you will choose one tool of fiscal policy, either government spending or taxes, to complete the activities below. So I'm going to go over kind of the government spending, but if you decide to use taxes as the government tool, that's fine. But we're going to do, or the example I'm going to show is for government spending. Okay, so I'm going to put right here, government spending. But again, if you decide you'd rather talk about taxes, then that's an option as well. Okay, maybe answer this in a complete sentence too. So maybe the tool I am choosing is government spending. Great. Okay. Do you think this tool should be increased or decreased to help the economy? So let's talk a little bit about government spending. The government spends a lot of money to try to influence the economy in a positive way. Everything that is funded through the government is government spending. So schools, infrastructure, all kinds of different job opportunities. These are all ways that the government spend money in order to try to create more jobs. However, some people feel that the government spends too much money. A lot of people say the government spends too much money on infrastructure, or they just waste a lot of money, or they spend too much money on the military, or the defense budget, or various other things. So do you think this tool should be increased or decreased to help the economy? And if you're not sure how to answer this one yet, that's okay, because we're going to read some articles and maybe you'll be influenced to decide one way or the other. Using an internet search engine, find a website or an article that shares your opinion and copy the URL in the space below. Keep in mind that it might take you some time to find a good article, so don't automatically take the first one you find. So what I did is I just Googled government spending good, and then I Googled government spending bad, and then found basically one of each article, because in this one, we're asked to find an article that agrees with what we put in part B. However, we're also going to have to find an article that disagrees with what we put. So part C and then part F basically are opposites. So one of those is asking you to find an article that you agree with, and then one asks you to find an article that you disagree with. So either way, we're going to have to find an article that says that government spending is good, and then we're going to have to find one that says government spending is bad. So I just Googled those two things, and here's a couple of articles I found. So this first article from the International Monetary Fund is about how government spending boosts the economy. Okay, so this is one that talks about government spending is good. Or at least that's the opinion of this article. Now, let's say we decided to put that that's what we are agreeing with. We'll go ahead and put this. What you want to do is copy this URL, if this is the one you agree with. We'll just place that there. There's 3 main points from this source. So when we're looking at the source, we want to look for 3 main points. Well, it's pretty easy to find points, main points. One thing is just to look at each paragraph. or each key heading. So addressing key challenges, you can probably find one of the key points in here, right? Look at this first sentence. The proposed plans are designed to address a range of challenges that have held back the economy. Many of these challenges have been magnified by the pandemic, which has worsened the income inequality and had a disproportionate impact on historically marginalized groups. Then it says that these two bills, the AJP and the AFP, would make substantial investments in both physical and human capital to help alleviate these disparities and create greater opportunities for economic advancement. So I would say this could be considered one of the main points right here. Okay. By the way, the AJP and AFP, those are government spending bills that were essentially designed to increase jobs in the market. So those two bills, one of them is the American Jobs Plan, the AJP, and then the American Families Plan, AFP. Okay, so that could be one of the points that you could say. Now, you don't have to say that exact point. You don't even have to use this exact article. So that's up to you. But that's one thing you could choose to put. Okay, then maybe we could find another main point in the next subheading, right? The output impact. It says here, AJP and AFP will add a cumulative 5.3% to the level of U.S. GDP during the 2022 through 2024 as spending ramps up over the next few years. Okay, so there's another, perhaps we could say this right here, right? And again, this is another point that the author is trying to make that helps say that government spending is good in this case, right? Okay. Now, so those are two examples. I'm going to go and let you look through these next subheadings and see if you can find another main point by the author. Okay, so I gave you two main points, but maybe you can find a third on your own. Part E, based on what you have read, what biases might the author bring to his or her opinion? So one thing we might want to look for in terms of biases is we can look at, well, where's this article coming from? The International Monetary Fund, okay? So you can research about that and see if there's any biases you might be able to find, right? There's also political biases. Generally, when it comes to government spending, the Democratic Party is usually for larger government and larger amounts of spending. So this author is most likely a Democrat, most likely. And so you can see that could be considered a bias, right? A lot of times you could also look up the author and see what other things they have written. Okay. In this case, this was written by Andrew Hodge and Lee Lin. Okay. So again, biases, there's always political biases, right? And you also might mention that there might be biases considering whatever, wherever this article was posted, right? So again, this was pro-government spending, right? This article we just went over was kind of pro-government spending. Now we're going to look up essentially the same types of questions, but this time we're looking for against government spending. So the next article we're going to look at is going to be anti-government spending. So for that one, I just looked up government spending bad and found this article. You don't have to use this article again, but this is an article, The High Cost of Too Much Government Spending by Adam A. Millsap. Okay. And so you can read through this, and it talks about some of the reasons why government spending is, he thinks of it as a bad thing. And so here's his opinion piece, right? So what are some of the main points, right? So it says, first, it increases the cost of living via subsidies and drives inflation, which makes sense. If the government spends a lot of money, it's going to increase inflation, right? Which is going to increase basically the price of goods and services throughout the entire economy, potentially. And we've seen that in recent, throughout the whole last couple of years, right? With all the government spending, we've seen a lot of inflation go up. In fact, December December 2021 showed a year-over-year inflation rate of 7%. So he's arguing that an increase in inflation from the large amount of government spending. He also says too much spending reduces innovation by crowding out private sector investments. Okay, so here he's saying basically that the private sector should be the one making investments in the economy and not the government. Again, the private sector is basically private corporations or publicly owned corporations. Here's another thing he says. Too much spending reduces economic mobility by weakening the incentive to work via transfers and redistribution. So here are three main points that he points out. You don't necessarily have to use these exact points. You don't even have to use this exact article, but those are just some ideas. Okay. Again, that was part G, the 3 main points. Based on what you read, what biases might the author bring to his or her opinion? So we've kind of answered that question for previous one, and it's same idea for this one. So we're looking for what biases he may have. So clearly this person is against government spending. Generally means he's probably Republican. Again, Republicans do not want less government spending, and usually Democrats want more government spending. So there might be a political influence in his writing here. You could also go down, if you continue to scroll down, a lot of times you can see more about the author, right? So here it has the author's a little bit about his bio, right? Other articles he's written. Here it talks about a book he's written. And also if you scroll down even more, you can see other articles written by this author. Okay, right. Here's another article written by the same guy, right? So that might show some of his other biases. Man, I get so many ads. So it says Mississippi's 29 by 29 occupational licensing review is a good first step, right? So he was pro Mississippi's 29 by 29 occupational licensing. So that might influence his opinion about government spending as well. Okay. Okay. Hope that made sense. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're not going to talk about government spending. We're actually going to talk about interest rates. Now, this is a very important thing. It's a very heavy thing that's been talked about the economy recently. But let's go ahead and read this paragraph here. The Federal Reserve has control over the nation's monetary policy. Through adjusting the required reserve ratio, buying and selling government bonds on the open market, or adjusting the discount rate, the Fed can influence interest rates and the money supply in the country. When we talk about interest rates, it's important to distinguish between long-term and short-term interest rates. Short-term interest rates are directly affected when the Fed changes its federal funds and discount rates and are for loans made for short periods. Long-term interest rates are set by market forces. Lower long-term interest rates encourage investment by businesses and consumers because the cost of paying back the money over a long period is low. Keep this distinction in mind while you complete the following activity. So this is talking about how the Fed, the Federal Reserve, generally controls the nation's interest rates. That's the main thing we're going to be talking about. The interest rates on loans. So when interest rates are low, the good thing that causes is it causes a lot of investors to be able to invest because they're able to borrow money with a very low interest rate. So being able to borrow money with a low interest rate means you can now use that money to invest in other opportunities, expand your businesses, and so forth. So that's why we see when the interest rates are really low, we see the stock market go up usually because all these companies are able to invest in these long-term projects because the interest rate is low, because they could take out these huge loans and invest in these large projects. It also allows other people to, investors, to be able to buy more stocks or more assets and take out a loan in order to do that. On the other hand, if the interest rates are low, that causes inflation to go up. So even though the stock market might look like it's doing great when the interest rates are low, the inflation usually goes really high. And that's what we're seeing a lot today too. And the Fed generally has a lot of control over the way that inflation works because they have a lot of control over the nation's monetary policy and they have control of the interest rates. So keep that in mind. So there's some good things like the stock market be able to grow, peoples and corporations able to make huge investments because they can take out large loans with low interest. However, it causes inflation to go up, usually a lot. Okay, so part A. Considering the current state of the economy and what you know about monetary policy, do you think the Federal Reserve should increase rates, decrease rates, or keep interest rates constant? Why? So I explained the two sides about whether or not to increase interest rates. So I want you to be able to put your opinion here. If you're still not sure, well, we're going to go over some articles and perhaps that'll sway you one way or the other, and you can hold off on part A a little bit. Okay. Now, this is very similar to what we did on the previous page, page 5. So we're going to look up an article that agrees with us saying that interest rates should go one way. And then we're going to read an article that says the opposite. So basically, I just Googled why interest rates should go up. And then I've also Googled why interest rates should go down, right? And so we're going to see both sides here. So let's go ahead and look at this one here. Why wait? The Federal Reserve should raise interest rates now. So this article is talking about why the Fed should increase interest rates. By the way, this dude right here, this is Jerome Powell. He's the Fed chairman. So, yeah. All right, so let's talk. And again, it's going to talk to us, or one of the things we're going to have to answer is, what are 3 main points from the article, right? So that'll be in the next part. List 3 main points from the article. Okay, so let's go and look. Here shows this chart about inflation, and you can see current inflation rate is all the way up to like 6.8%. It says it's actually up to 7% in the latest numbers from December 2021. So he talks about rents rising, right? It says apartment rates and the imputed rent on owner-occupied homes constitutes about 1/3 of the index, and real estate values are rising at nearly 20% annual pace. Okay, so yes, we really do not want to see real estate going up that fast because then it might price people out of the market, people that want to buy a home. Here it also talks about the November CPI reported only 3.8% annual jump in the cost of shelter, but a huge rent increase from 2021 are fully factored into the housing component. Look for it to jump at its highest rate in decades and keep reported headline inflation elevated in 2022. And you may have noticed this, right? If you are buying things, you may have noticed prices going up, especially in certain sectors like the automobiles, cars, especially if you're trying to buy a used car. The prices have gone up quite substantially. The price of just renting a house or renting an apartment has gone up substantially. So these are certain things that have increased quite a bit because the Fed has kept the interest rates so low. All right. Supplies disrupted. Okay, global supply chain disruptions will continue, and transportation disruptions will interrupt supplies of consumers' goods and components for U.S. and European manufacturers. Okay, talks about low-cost supplies. So go ahead and find 3 points from, and you can use any 3 points from this article, and we'll put them there. Unless it's the one you disagree with, then you'll put it on the next section, right? Based on what you read, what biases? So again, we're looking for biases, all right? So let's see. It's written for Market Watch. So this is probably someone who has a lot of interest in the market, right? So someone who's probably an investor in the stock market. But obviously, we all care about the economy, not just investors. Here we can see other articles this person has written, right? Digital dollars are coming, but is the Fed ready? So this person probably thinks that cryptocurrencies are going to be a part of our future, right? So that might be a bias that this person has, right? Clearly, this person is not a fan of Jerome Powell. You can see his other two articles the author wrote. Powell and Biden are rolling the dice on inflation and growth. Powell dallies too much on inflation, right? So clearly, this author, Peter Morici, clearly does not like Jerome Powell and potentially not Biden either. So just that would be another indicator that this person has biases against those people. Okay. Here is where we write the opposite. So again, so we'll look up one that talks about why the Fed should not increase interest rates. Now, again, you could switch these, right? So whichever one you think you agree with, you want to put that one first, and then the one you disagree with, you'll put next, right? Okay. So anyway, this author, Angela Glover Blackwell, talks about the Federal Reserve should not increase interest rates. So let's go ahead and look at some. And again, we want to find three main points like we've done before, right? So it says communities that are still struggling to recover and the wrong decision for America. She advocates for higher interest rates, point to an improving job market as a sign of America has come back from the recession. But many activists, economists, and community groups know that raising interest rates would stymie the many communities, particularly those of color, that continue to face persistent unemployment, underemployment, and stagnant wages. So there's one main point you could possibly use, right? That activists, economists, and community groups feel that interest rates would stymie, meaning like slow down the growth of some communities, right? So that might be one of her main points, right? This one's highlighted, so maybe that's going to be one of the main points we want to use here. It says, by keeping interest rates low, the Fed can promote continued job creation that leads to tighter labor markets, higher wages, less discrimination, and better job opportunities, especially within those communities still struggling post-recession. So that's another one of her main points. So then you want to use a total of three main points, and that's going to be in part F. Okay, so I've given you two. You need to find a third. Okay, what biases might this author have? So again, we've went over what biases from three previous articles. I want you to read through this article and see if you could find a bias from this author according from this article. Okay? All right. And again, you could use different articles. You could decide which ones to agree with or not agree with, right? Okay. Now that you have analyzed both sides of fiscal and monetary policy, it's time to create a debate for a television news show. Choose the information you compiled in either task 1 or task 2 and compose a script that meets these requirements. All right, so write 10 lines of dialogue, each for 2 characters, so 20 lines of dialogue in total. The dialogue must be economics related and relevant. One character must take your viewpoint, and the other character must take the opposing viewpoint. Script each character's rationale for why the specific action they believe in should be taken. Include each character's main opposition to the opposing viewpoint. Ensure that each character questions the others about points of perceived bias, with each character responding to the other's question. Okay, so we could just make two characters. Let's do maybe Bill and Sally. And let's just create a position for each of these people. And we could do it based on what we talked about with government spending, or about taxation if you did that one, or about whether or not the Fed should increase interest rates. So maybe Bill, we could say, so he tells Sally, I can't believe how much my groceries have cost me lately. Exclamation point. Sally says, I know. And have you seen gas prices? Then maybe Bill says, why isn't the Fed, maybe that should be capitalized, the Fed increasing interest rates to reduce the impact of inflation? Does Jerome Powell even know what he's doing? Okay. Here's where Sally disagrees, right? I agree that inflation has been bad and quite bad recently, but I don't think the Fed should increase interest rates. Okay. Go on. Bill. You kind of see how this goes, right? Now we're going to talk about what are some of the reasons why Bill might feel that interest rates should go up. And Sally's going to express why she feels that interest rates should stay low or go lower. Okay, so Bill might, talk about Bill's main points are going to be from, you could look at the articles, right, that we looked, right, that, problems with inflation, problems with, we looked at that article. Let's go ahead and look again. Talk about supplies disrupted, right? Everything from this article, right? You can talk about inflation has gone all the way up to 7%, right? And that's the highest it's been since, the early 80s. And then, of course, Sally can talk about, things from this article, right? Or talk about Bill's biases, right? So Sally might talk about, well, there's growth. It's causing the market to grow. It's causing more businesses to have more investments, and that way it's creating more jobs, right? And the stock market has never been this high, and yada yada, right? So you just have the characters go back and forth in this kind of way, right? Questioning each other, making sure that each of the characters defend their points. You could even bring up numbers, right, from articles or from websites. So these are various things you could do. I hope I've sent you on the right track with this. Now, again, you don't have to talk about specifically the Fed increasing or decreasing interest rates. You could talk about the government spending ones we did, or taxation, right? So you have a lot of options there. Okay, so I hope I've sent you off on the right path. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below and I'll try to answer them. And again, you could use different articles, you can bring up different points. And obviously, as time passes, as this video gets older and older, depending on when you're doing this assignment, you might have completely different numbers. You might have a completely different opinion. So that's fine. But just hope I set you on the right path, gave you some good ideas of how to get started, what to do, and how to do it. Okay. Well, with that, I'll see you next time. Take care.